Hello and welcome to Want to Hear Something Weird? The weirdest podcast about the weirdest stuff. I'm one of your hosts.
The weirdest people.
With the weirdest people you've ever seen in your life or heard.
Yeah.
Me, I'm Tom.
Hey, I'm Laura.
Switched up the intro a little bit there.
Wow,
just
that's
kind of
thrilling.
freestyled it.
Really thrilling. Tom,
Mm-hmm.
it's my week to tell you something.
It is.
You know what I'm going to talk about?
I do know, but but tell the listeners.
Mothman.
The Mothman.
So if you're familiar at all with Mothman or with Tom, either or.
Me and the Mothman are not interchangeable.
Well,
That's kind of what you're implying.
that's up for debate. Mothman, fair to say, is your favorite cryptid.
I don't think he's a cryptid, Mothman.
Ooh.
I mean, it depends on if you are saying a cryptid is a legitimate creature that lives on the earth that we just haven't discovered yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people that think Bigfoot is a type of primate that was maybe like the missing link, and there's only a handful of them, and that's why we can't find them. But it's a real animal. Or people who think the Loch Ness monster is like a dinosaur that was, a pack of sauropods were trapped during, I don't know, some cataclysmic event in Loch Ness, and they can actually get out to sea through a tunnel, but they are legitimate dinosaurs. They're legitimate creatures. Whereas I think
it's even weirder.
I think the Mothman might be from another dimension. I don't think the Mothman, I don't think there's a Mothman necessarily on Earth right now. I think they come and go.
Wow. When you ask a question, thinking it's a yes or no.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think the Mothman is one of the most interesting, weird, paranormal stories out there, just because it is so well documented.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about sort of a series of events that took place in the mid-60s, roughly, in West Virginia.
That's when the Mothman made his big splash. Which is interesting. Sorry if I cut you off before you've even started. But I don't remember hearing about the Mothman when I was a kid.
No, I didn't either. No, I don't think it really was. I think it came up again because of that Richard Gere movie, which I'll mention quickly in 2002.
That was the first I had ever heard of it, the Mothman prophecies, yeah.
But yeah, I don't remember that as something I learned about.
Which is kind of hilarious because I do remember when that movie came out. I didn't see it in theaters, but I saw it on DVD later.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure I was a teenager when it came out. And I remember that it was kind of a laughing stock. It was a thing late night hosts would make fun of because, the Mothman prophet. You see this trailer that kind of just looks like a generic, journalistic thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And then the title comes up, The Mothman Prophecies. And people are like, what the hell is this? Mm-hmm. But I really think that is when the Mothman actually entered the public consciousness. Maybe there was more of it in the 60s or 70s when this stuff was going on and it just went away.
And also probably just on a national scale. I'm sure people local to the area, it was a big thing. Thing, but yeah.
But I was going to mention too, me and you were at a cabin recently that we were just watching I think Tubi or something like that on TV. The Unsolved Mysteries channel, of course, which most of these things have, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But an old episode that looked like it was, to my eye, from the 80s.
Yes, you're right.
Came up all about the Mothman. And it was a good episode. I was impressed even with the limited special effects they did. The costume or whatever, that it didn't look goofy. It did look legitimately scary.
You know how Unsolved Mysteries is known for often having the people that they're telling the stories about play themselves
Yeah, in the
in the
reenactments.
reenactments? So you think they got the real Mothman to
Maybe,
reappear?
maybe that's what.
It's the Unsolved Mysteries way.
I mean, Robert Stack was in Hollywood for a long time. He's got connections. He could call his agent, say, the Mothman's agent. You think you can get him in on this episode of Unsolved Mysteries? That we're gonna shoot a reenactment with like $200.
All right. Well, what the heck is the Mothman?
Yeah, for people sitting there going, enough. I don't even
Get
know who the
to it.
Mothman is.
So the Mothman is a West Virginia, fair to say, folklore legend that is a humanoid creature that was first seen in Point Pleasant in November of 1966. So the first sighting was in a graveyard.
Okay.
5 men were digging graves in nearby.
5 men were digging graves?
Mm-hmm. I think that was their job.
Yeah, but I mean, all at the same time? That's been a lot of graves needing dug.
I guess you're right. I didn't think about that.
But maybe it could have been a family that died or something.
And this was in a nearby town near to Point Pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And they claimed to see a man-like figure fly over their heads through sort of like jumping from tree to tree. And they describe it as human-like.
Mm-hmm.
But that it had, that was very, very big.
Right, like bigger than a person.
Yes.
Like 8 feet tall or something, or 10 feet tall, something like that.
So they say 7 to 10.
Okay.
A couple days later, two young couples were out one evening, and there was a large white creature whose eyes, quote, glowed red when their car headlights picked up on them.
Right.
And they said that the creature was like a large flying man with 10-foot wings that followed their car while they were driving. And
presumably driving pretty fast.
And trying to get away from it because they're freaked out. And it followed them all the way to the edge of town. But they were outside this area known as the TNT area. And it was a place in World War II where they manufactured, I think it was ammunition or something like that. And they report this to the police, and one of the women said it was like a slender, muscular man with white wings, and she couldn't see a face or anything because of the hypnotic effect on the eyes. And one of the other people with them said it was able to fly almost like 100 miles per hour because it just was like going by incredible speeds. Yeah. And that one of them said, if I had seen it while by myself, I wouldn't have said anything, but there were 4 of us who saw it. So this gets picked up in the newspaper the very next day. So those are the first 2 sightings of the Mothman prior to a newspaper article.
Okay. So there were 2 sightings before word had even really gotten out.
And they were pretty, they were within a couple of days of one another.
Okay.
And the news, was on the front page of the Point Pleasant Register. Actually, I don't know if it was on the front page, but it was
in there somewhere.
I don't know why I thought that.
That it was on the front page. Yeah. It should have been.
I mean, that's how I pictured it in my mind. So then I said it, and then I said, well, I don't know. That's a fact. Yeah. But the article was titled, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird Creature Something." And not long after that, the national press picked it up. And so it was started to spread across the U.S.
But probably mostly as a, like local news towards the end of the newscast, doing in the lighter side of news, a Mothman? In Point Pleasant? That's what this couple said they saw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There were numerous other sightings, like throughout the next year, really, that was almost led to a wave of panic in the region.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the witnesses described them as the same sort of, same kind of features,
Same
like
general
tall,
description.
humanoid, large wings, glowing eyes, and and it was often right around that TNT area. And one resident claimed that he saw strange patterns on his television, and it was shortly followed by a weird noise outside.
Okay.
Which you never.
Any
combination
further details on the weird noise? What was weird about it?
No, that I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But he goes outside, shines a flashlight toward the direction of the noise, and said he saw two red eyes that resembled bicycle reflectors.
Okay.
Looking back at him.
Yeah.
And I read that this particular sighting is one that's pretty popular in the Mothman universe, because it allegedly led to the disappearance of his dog.
Oh yeah.
And apparently some people still believe that really happened.
That the Mothman took his dog. Yeah.
So now let's get to the event that I'm sure you'll have a lot to say.
Okay.
The Silver Bridge collapse.
Okay.
So, not funny, but I was like, I wanted to do this because I thought Mothman would be sort of relatively light fare, and then
but
I
it's
started
not.
researching it. It's not always that.
There a really tragic event that a lot of people think was either. Well, talk about the event, and then we'll talk about what people think.
In December of 1967. So this, if you're keeping track, is a little over a year after the first sighting of Mothman.
But there have been lots of sightings throughout.
But there have been, yes, a lot of these sightings and reports, and all kind of sounding similar. And there was a bridge called the Silver Bridge that connected West Virginia and Ohio.
Yeah.
And this evening, traffic was apparently really bad on this bridge. And
well, it was like right before Christmas.
Yes,
right?
It was December 15th. And the bridge was originally built in 1928 when cars were a lot lighter than they were in 1967.
Yeah.
So for instance, the Model T was about 1,500 pounds, whereas most cars, the average in 1967 was 4,000 pounds. So that's significantly heavier. And there were a lot of cars on this bridge. And apparently that it was designed in a way that if one part failed, the whole bridge would fail. So which
is not the way they design most bridges nowadays, I would assume.
I would hope.
Yeah. I feel like, because when you see bridges that, suspension bridges, I guess, like bridges over a waterway after like an earthquake or something, or like, I don't know, getting damaged, like it doesn't seem like it takes the whole bridge down necessarily anymore.
But unfortunately, that was not the case. And it was also a very cold day, and without warning, there was a piece of the bridge closer to the the Ohio side that was like a connecting piece, the eye bar, that cracked, and it caused the bridge to fail and collapse, and a lot of people perished in that accident. And a lot of people think that the Mothman was sort of a premonition of sorts.
Yeah.
Of this disaster.
There's I was going to say that Seems like people fall into either thinking the Mothman had something to do with it, because I believe there were also people that said they saw the
Oh,
Mothman
okay.
near the bridge,
Mm-hmm.
like right before or right after the collapse. I don't think those are like as well sourced though, as a lot of the other incidents, because yeah, obviously there was a lot going on,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, people either think he had something to do with it, that he did it, that he
Mm-hmm.
weakened the bridge somehow, or that, yeah, it was some kind of warning, some kind of prophecy, or
Mm-hmm.
some kind of Mothman prophecy, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that it definitely doesn't seem like the Mothman did it if there's a very reasonable explanation of this bridge had more than double the weight it was designed for on it. And it's also, what, 40, 50 years old at this point too.
Right. Well, I was going to say that it seems as though a lot of a lot of the connection that's made between Mothman and this bridge collapse comes from the Mothman prophecies. It was
Right.
the John Keel book,
Mhm.
which obviously the movie was based upon, but the book was first published in 1960s or 1975, which is, a handful of years after these events.
Right.
And that's where it's sort of, the connection between Mothman and like sort of a paranormal, or excuse me, the bridge and some kind of paranormal event sort of came to be. It sounds a lot like the book wasn't taken all that seriously.
Yeah. I mean, no, yeah. And I've read the Mothman prophecies.
I thought you did, yeah.
But I've read also, I think, The Eighth Tower by him,
Hmm.
which is great. But like, yeah, it definitely, like, based on the cover and everything, it was like, oh, they sold this in shops that sold crystals in the 70s. Like, it's from
Mm-hmm.
that kind of publisher. It's not a big major release, which is why I'm kind of surprised that it got made into a movie starring Richard Gere,
Yeah.
since it wasn't really known. And like, Richard Gere doesn't necessarily seem like he's like into weird stuff,
Mm.
like he hasn't done other work that, it's like, oh, this is a passion of mine.
Mm.
Like, it seems like he just kind of got hired for the job.
Maybe it was a slow season
Slow season 4.
for him
Oh, slow
in
season
terms
for
of
him. Yeah.
getting work.
I mean, I remember there being a lot of marketing for the movie. Like, it seemed like,
Okay.
I forget what studio put it out, but whoever put it out, they seemed to, try their best to get people to go see it.
Yeah.
You don't put a handsome guy like Richard Gere in there unless you want people to come see your movie.
I think also, I was trying to think if a book like that would be taken more seriously or less seriously now.
Yeah.
I think that more people now are at least interested in this stuff and on like a wider scale than they were
Right.
before. Probably just because the internet gives everyone access to it. Because, well, you've read the book, you could attest to how well researched it felt, or if it was like a lot of hearsay.
No, it felt well researched. I mean, there's definitely, there's definitely a lot of second and third hand stories in it, but I feel like, they're all kind of labeled as such.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I remember too, he didn't even really he put forward like a few theories in the book, but ultimately it was like, I don't know what this thing is that happened.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been a mass hallucination. And if it was, that's still, a very interesting phenomenon to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the book, from what I remember, kind of just collects all the stories of strangeness happening around there
Mm-hmm.
and puts them forward, and kind of is, like, your guess is as good as mine what all this was about. And even if it was connected at all.
Makes you think.
It does make you think.
Well, I'm curious to hear about so you said that you think, well, you're interested in the idea that it's an interdimensional being, and I'm curious to hear a little more about what makes you say that.
I think it's possible that it's either an interdimensional being of some sort or some kind of manifestation of consciousness from like the people in Point Pleasant, which is another thing that, some people talk about, not only in this case, but in lots of cases, the idea that especially trauma can almost like, again, it kind of similar to how the X-Men work, that like kind of unlocks something in maybe all people, maybe just some people, but those raw emotions, especially if it's multiple people at the same time, it can somehow manifest itself into, a physical object or something that looks like a physical object, but maybe isn't.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah. But it could just be, I don't know, dimensions bleeding over somehow. This Mothman's from like if the many worlds theory is correct and there's an infinite number of universes with, every type of change, it could be, and there's one. Sucks, but right next door to us, it's a planet full of Mothmen. And sometimes there's like, a glitch or whatever, and they accidentally wind up in our universe for a little bit. I mean, at least that's how it worked in like the Spider-Verse movies. Miles Morales movies. That was, you could like glitch in and out of universes. So that's also very possible with the Mothman. Did you read anything in your research about the sightings in not Canada, in Chicago a few years ago, the Mothman?
No, I did not.
Yeah, there were like some sporadic sightings of, same exact description, same type of thing that people saw around Chicago. And I know it was something that a lot of, people that like weird stuff were keeping an eye on, because they were like, yeah, if it did come before a tragic event, last time people saw it, is something bad about to happen in Chicago. And to the best of my knowledge, like nothing remotely close to the bridge collapse happened in Chicago during that time. So there goes that idea.
I did read that there were additional more recent sightings in Point Pleasant in the last decade, and allegedly by someone that didn't know about the theory. They were new to the area.
You can't be in Point Pleasant and not know about the Mothman. They got a big statue of him in the middle of town. Have you seen people put things in his butt? Okay. The Mothman statue.
That's disrespectful.
He's got kind of like a BBL, and he's got like a crack that you can fit all kinds of things in, and people do that. Somebody gave him a tramp stamp once too.
Oh,
if you're building a Mothman statue, maybe don't give him an ass. Figure out something around that. So be like, the ass is covered in fur.
Well, I was going to say they have an annual Mothman Festival, which seems like a lot of fun. There's games for kids and family fun.
Yeah.
So if you're out that way.
It shouldn't be. I mean, the Mothman's not for families. That's what I think.
Well,
you're playing with something you don't necessarily want if you're taking your family to meet the Mothman.
And lots of people dressed up in costumes as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a few possible explanations that aren't paranormal, interdimensional, or...
Yeah, I know like a lot of people think it was an owl.
A lot of people think it was an owl. The way you said owl was very interesting. Say it again.
Owl.
And there's some people think it was an elaborate hoax of a guy that was dressed up in a costume.
Right.
There was a professor, I think it was the University of West Virginia, a biology professor that said that it looked, based on the descriptions that people were giving, sounded to be a lot like a sandhill crane, which is, they're quite tall, like almost human height.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, have very large wingspan and bright red their flesh around their eyes that could look, like red eyes.
I don't buy any of that.
You don't?
Well, I think like maybe if somebody saw it flying, and confused it or something, but so many of the accounts, it's like, no, it was standing in the road and it was 10 feet tall. Like it was massive. And none of these things are that big.
Yeah.
And also, you're talking about people that live in that town that are presumably fairly familiar with the local wildlife and,
Yeah, people, think that it's sort of a bird that's in mid-migration or something, they have other potential scientific explanations for it. I don't know. I do see some merit to a potential, hysteria.
Yeah.
Because there were 2 sightings, relatively similar sounding, but then after, it was in the news, especially in the local area, they really cranked up a notch. And I think that,
people were looking for it then, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, anything that they would witness that they couldn't quite explain, or anything creepy or weird. They were so maybe paralyzed with fear, honestly. If it's something happening in their area and they're hearing all these stories, they're, convinced it's going to happen to them.
Yeah, you're hearing stories and you're not hearing any kind of resolution to the story. There's not, the police found a, guy in a suit, or somebody got a picture of it. It's this bird.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, probably a lot of people very confused and not hearing any kind of updates other than just more people seeing it. It's a good recipe for hysteria.
Indeed.
And if you get enough people hysterical, maybe their consciousnesses can put a physical being into being.
Wow.
Into the world. And they birthed the Mothman.
Wow.
But then he went back to the other dimension.
Any last thoughts or anything else you'd like to say about Mothman that I haven't gotten to?
No. I mean, you covered all the main stuff, the big sightings. Yeah. I'm always, I don't know, other sightings of the Mothman, I'm always kind of liable not to believe, I guess. Just because it seemed like it was something that nobody saw before Point Pleasant. Bunch of people saw it in Point Pleasant, and then nowadays it just gets like sporadic sightings around. But who knows? I mean, if it's coming from another dimension, it's easy for it to pop in and out. I never want to see him. Sounds terrifying.
I prefer not to.
Yeah. Stay in your own dimension, Mothman. If you like the show, why not give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or tell a friend about it. Send it to them. Those kinds of things really help out young podcasts like ours. And if you want to follow us on social media, we're at WannaHearPod on most social media. We're also wannahearpod@gmail.com. If you've got a spooky story you want to write to us or send us a voice note about, either way, we would love it. I think that's it for this week. Thank you for the time spent with Mothman.
We'll see you next week. Want to Hear Something Weird is a Clamor audio production, distributed by the Cloud 10 Network. Hosted and executive produced by Tom Reynolds and me, Laura Anderson. Executive produced by Aaron Hilliard.
Clamor General Manager Rich Statter. Associate Producer Ethan Aronson. Post-production supervised by Devin Ruskin. Production Assistant Samara Mullick. Special thanks to Sim Sarna and Saiba Krieger at Cloud 10.